The chandeliers blazed like captured stars above the ballroom, their light spilling across marble floors polished to a mirror's perfection. Laughter mingled with the clink of crystal glasses and a murmur of calculated conversations. Everywhere one looked were tailored suits, sequin gowns, and the unshakable confidence of people accustomed to being the wealthiest in the room. The gala was not merely a celebration. It was a marketplace of power, a stage where reputations could rise or collapse with the lift of a glass or the bend of a smile. Victoria Langford moved through the throng with the grace of someone who had been groomed for moments like this since birth. Her diamond necklace glittered like frost across her collarbone, but it was her expression that drew attention. Poised, practiced, impenetrable. Her eyes scanned the room with the quiet arrogance of a predator assessing prey. Whispers followed in her wake. She was not only a billionaire, but the architect of several ruthless mergers that had made rivals bankrupt and allies cautious. In her mind, the gala was not about celebration. It was about maintaining dominance. On the far side of the room, a woman entered quietly, unnoticed at first by most. Maya Johnson's presence was different. Where Victoria demanded attention, Maya commanded it subtly, like gravity. Her gown was elegant but understated, her jewelry minimal. She carried herself with the posture of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. As she crossed the room, conversations faltered, if only for a heartbeat, before resuming with a slightly sharper edge. Those who recognized her whispered to their neighbors. Those who did not glance twice, uncertain whether to assign her importance or dismiss her as decoration. The host of the gala, eager to showcase the gathering of titans, led Maya directly toward Victoria. The crowd shifted, forming a semicircle that buzzed with anticipation. Introductions at such events were not mere formalities. They were performances. Partnerships were hinted at in handshakes, alliances born in gestures, fortunes hinted at in glances. All eyes fixed on the two women as they faced one another for the first time. Maya Johnson, the host announced warmly, an extraordinary strategist in global finance, and Victoria Langford, whom I need not introduce. Maya extended her hand with natural composure, her smile neither servile nor confrontational. It was a simple, human gesture offered with dignity. Victoria's gaze flicked downward to the hand, then upward to the face it belonged to. For a brief second, her expression froze into a mask that cracked ever so slightly, revealing distaste. With the kind of deliberation that makes silence feel deafening, she folded her arms instead of returning the gesture. The air changed. Conversation stalled. Laughter died into awkward coughs. The space between the two women became a stage, and Victoria, either oblivious or indifferent to the scrutiny, leaned forward slightly. Her voice carried just enough to be heard by the surrounding guests. "I'm afraid I reserve handshakes for those I intend to remember," she said coolly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The words, delivered with genteel venom, landed with more force than any shout. A few gasps echoed around them. Others tried to mask their discomfort behind forced chuckles. Maya's hand remained extended for a fraction of a second longer, then lowered gracefully without a trace of embarrassment. Her eyes met Victoria's, not with anger, but with a steadiness that unsettled the billionaire more than outrage ever could. "Perhaps another time," Maya said softly, her tone as polished as silk over steel. The host cleared his throat, attempting to smooth over the moment with a nervous laugh. But the damage was done. The insult had been public, unmistakable, and unforgettable. Guests began to whisper in clusters, their words darting like shadows across the room. Some were appalled at Victoria's audacity. Others smirked, feeding on the drama like vultures circling a spectacle. Maya stepped back, her posture unbroken, and drifted toward the quieter end of the ballroom. She did not rush, did not glance back. Her retreat was not submission but strategy, as though she had already calculated that silence could wound more deeply than rebuttal. Victoria remained standing in her place, basking in what she imagined was triumph. To her, the refusal was an assertion of superiority, a reminder to the audience that status was not given but inherited and guarded. What Victoria failed to notice was the shifting of perception around her. Eyes that had once admired now measured. Some saw her gesture as strength, others as a reckless display of arrogance that might cost her later. She had intended to diminish Maya. But instead, she had revealed something raw about herself, something that clung like a stain to her immaculate gown. In the quiet corner, Maya accepted a glass of water from a passing server. Her reflection shimmered in its surface, distorted by ripples, but her mind was steady. She had faced worse insults in her climb to this moment, worse dismissals cloaked in civility. The difference now was scale. This insult had an audience, and audiences remember. From across the room, subtle eyes followed her, curious to see how she would react, how she would carry herself after being so publicly slighted. She gave them nothing more than composure. For Maya, dignity was not a performance, but a discipline, one honed over years of being underestimated. As the night wore on, the whispers about the refusal did not die. They deepened. The incident became a current beneath the music, a rhythm people moved even as they pretended to ignore it. Victoria floated from conversation to conversation, her laughter a little too sharp, her charm a little too forced, as though she needed to convince herself that the moment had already been forgotten. But it had not been forgotten. It had only just begun. Those who knew Maya understood that her presence at the gala was not decorative. She was not a guest plucked from obscurity, but a keystone in negotiations that stretched across continents. Those who did not know her yet would soon learn. When the orchestra shifted into its final piece of the night, Victoria caught sight of Maya once more, speaking quietly with two executives near the exit. There was nothing ostentatious in the scene, yet something about the ease with which the men leaned toward her unsettled Victoria. It was a detail she brushed aside, too consumed with her own reflection of victory to recognize its significance. The evening ended with champagne toasts and scripted farewells. Limousines swept guests away into the night, carrying with them both memories and murmurs. Some would remember the glittering lights and lavish decorations. Others would remember only the still image of a black woman's outstretched hand left suspended in air, and the billionaire who refused to meet it. What none of them knew yet was that the true consequences of that moment were not confined to the ballroom. The refusal was not merely a social misstep. It was the spark that would ignite a far larger blaze. For Maya, the night did not mark humiliation but opportunity. For Victoria, it was not triumph but the first tremor of a fall she had never imagined possible. And though the music had faded, the story had only just begun. The room seemed to contract, the walls closing in around the two women. The executives no longer took notes. They watched, silent witnesses to a clash that was no longer just about a deal, but about the very definition of leadership. Some glanced at one another, silently acknowledging what had become clear. This was not a negotiation between equals. This was a reckoning. Victoria's temper, kept in check for most of the meeting, finally bled through. "You think because you prepared some elegant slides that you understand this world?" she hissed, her composure cracking. "You think endurance and pretty speeches replace bloodlines and legacy? People like you, outsiders, always mistake temporary opportunity for permanence. But power is inherited. It cannot be claimed by force of will." The words hung heavy, ugly in their nakedness, and for a moment no one breathed. It was not just an insult. It was a confession, a stripping away of the polished facade she had built. Maya did not need to respond with anger. She simply let the silence linger until it became unbearable. Then she folded her hands on the table and spoke with the kind of calm that only deep conviction allows. "You're right, Victoria," she said softly. "I don't have your bloodline. I wasn't handed a throne. Everything I have, I built, and because I built it, I understand its value. I know what it means to work for something so relentlessly that failure is not an option. That is why I sit here today with the power to decide the fate of this deal, why you sit here fighting to preserve an illusion." Gasps rippled through the room, not from the sharpness of her words, but from the clarity they brought. Everyone knew now, beyond doubt, what a fulcrum of power lay. Maya reached into her folder and placed the final set of documents on the table. Her signature line gleamed at the bottom, empty, waiting. Without it, the merger collapsed. Without her, the billions vanished like smoke. She slid the papers forward, her gaze steady. "Respect cannot be optional," she said. "It cannot be demanded by status and denied to others. It must be mutual, or it is nothing. And I will not bind billions of dollars to leadership that confuses arrogance for strength. Victoria's face blanched, fury flashing in her eyes as realization struck. For once, words failed her. She reached for the documents, desperate to salvage dignity, but Maya's hand rested lightly on them, firm, immovable. "I'm withdrawing my support," Maya said, each syllable deliberate. "This merger will not move forward under your shadow." The room erupted in whispers, the shock breaking like a wave. Executives scrambled to process what had just unfolded, the collapse of months of planning undone in seconds. Phones buzzed as assistants outside the boardroom began reporting on the news, already leaking through channels too quick to contain. Some faces reflected horror at the lost profits, others relief that someone had dared to end Victoria's stranglehold. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the polished floor. "You can't do this," she spat, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the panic beneath. "Do you know what this means? You're destroying opportunity for all of us." "No," Maya said, rising with calm authority. "I am refusing to enable arrogance that poisons opportunity. There will be other deals, other ventures, but this one ends here. Respect is not negotiable." Her words sealed the room in finality. Maya gathered her documents, leaving the unsigned papers like abandoned relics of a future that would never come. She walked toward the door, every step measured, every movement resonant with dignity. As she reached for the handle, she turned slightly, offering the room, not just Victoria, a last, steady glance. "Choose your leaders wisely," she said. "The cost of arrogance is always higher than you think." The door closed behind her, and the boardroom dissolved into chaos. Some rushed to strategize alternatives, others sat stunned. While Victoria stood rooted in place, her empire suddenly fragile in ways she had never imagined. For all her inherited wealth, for all her carefully crafted image, she had been undone not by numbers but by a refusal to respect. By evening, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire's racism costs $5 billion deal. News outlets replayed footage from the gala. The image of Victoria refusing Maya's hand now reframed as the moment everything began to unravel. Investors panicked. Stock prices dipped, and whispers of resignation within her empire spread like cracks in glass. What she had dismissed as strength had revealed itself as weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. Maya, in contrast, became a symbol not only of resilience but of integrity. Her refusal to compromise dignity for profit resonated beyond finance, striking chords in communities long accustomed to being overlooked. Interviews were requested, profiles written, her story told not as one of vengeance but of principle. She did not gloat, did not celebrate Victoria's downfall. She simply continued her work, aligning with leaders who understood that power without respect was unsustainable. Late that night, Maya returned once more to her hotel window. The city stretched beneath her like a living organism of light and shadow. She thought of the moment she had lowered her hand at the gala, the refusal that had sparked everything that followed. It had seemed small then, a gesture dismissed, yet it had revealed the truth of who they both were. One clinging to entitlement, the other anchored in resilience. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations, with invitations, with gratitude. She responded to none. Instead, she placed it aside and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. Power, she realized, was not about dominance. It was about choice. Tonight, she had chosen dignity over profit, and in doing so, she had rewritten the terms of power itself. Somewhere across the city, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, brandy untouched, staring at the skyline she had once believed bowed to her will. The headlines scrolled across her screen, each one a reminder that arrogance had a price. For the first time in her life, she faced a world where her name was not enough, where legacy could not shield her, where one refusal, her own, had cost her everything. The story did not end with Maya's victory or Victoria's fall. It ended with a truth carved into the memory of everyone who had watched it unfold. That respect is the only currency more valuable than wealth, and the absence of it can bankrupt even the most untouchable empires. And in that truth lay the final image, Maya walking forward into a future of her own making, unshaken, unbroken, leaving behind the ruins of arrogance with the quiet power of someone who had nothing left to prove. You said, The silence that followed Maya's words was so complete it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The contingency frameworks glowed on the screen, a constellation of foresight and strategy that dismantled every insinuation of incompetence. Executives leaned back in their seats, stunned not by her confidence, but by the depth of preparation that could only come from someone who understood the stakes far more intimately than Victoria ever had. For the first time, Maya was not the unknown strategist in the room. She was the center, the architect, the person whose vision commanded not just respect but necessity. Victoria shifted in her chair, her fingers tightening around the pen she had been twirling. The smirk she had worn throughout the meeting faltered into something harder, sharper, a mask straining concealed the sting of being outmaneuvered. Her gaze darted across the table, searching for allies, for the affirming nods that had always come so easily in the past. But she found hesitation instead, executives weighing not her legacy but her relevance. She had always believed her name was shield enough. Yet here in this room, it was not her wealth but her blindness that stood exposed. Maya closed her tablet with quiet finality. The success of this merger rests not on reputation, but on integrity, she said, her voice steady. Investors trust leadership that demonstrates respect, foresight, and resilience. Without that foundation, $5 billion is not a gain, but liability. The words landed with surgical precision, and the tension coiled tighter. Everyone knew what she had just done. She had shifted the conversation from numbers to values, from profits to principles. She had not only challenged Victoria's dominance, but linked her arrogance directly to risk. For executives whose lives were built around managing risk, the implication was as damning as any financial forecast. Victoria straightened, her chin lifting as she forced a laugh, brittle around the edges. Integrity, she repeated, as though the word itself were beneath her. Such lofty ideals, Maya. But business is built on strength, not sentiment. Investors do not care for morality. They care for returns. Then perhaps you misunderstand the nature of strength, Maya replied, eyes unwavering. It takes no strength to dismiss, to belittle, to exclude. Real strength is measured in the partnerships you build, in the respect you extend, even when it costs you nothing. That is what sustains returns in the long term. Anything else is arrogance masquerading as power. Tomorrow, her power would be written in numbers, in signatures, in a language even arrogance could not ignore. Across the city, Victoria rehearsed her dominance, preparing speeches laced with confidence and subtle threats. She expected the meeting to unfold as they always did, with her voice commanding, her presence intimidating, her signature sealing victory. She imagined Maya present as an accessory, someone to be brushed aside or spoken over. She had no idea that the ground beneath her had already begun to shift. The stage was set, though neither woman saw it in full. Victoria believed she was walking into another conquest. Maya knew she was walking into an unveiling. Their collision at the gala had been the spark. What awaited in the boardroom was the fire, and when it came, it would burn not with noise but with clarity, the kind that left no space for denial. By the time the city fell quiet that night, one truth had crystallized. The balance of power was not where Victoria believed it to be. The arrogance of one and the composure of the other had drawn invisible lines that would soon shape the fate of billions. And though the world slept, the story was already waiting to unfold in the morning light, where choices would reveal themselves and consequences would refuse to be ignored. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass facade of the conference tower, catching on steel beams and stretching to sky like a monument to human ambition. Inside, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation, a silence heavy enough to be felt in the chest. The world's eyes were not on this boardroom, but the decisions made here would ripple across industries, governments, and futures. The polished oak table gleamed beneath recessed lights, its surface crowded with dossiers, digital tablets, and the nervous hands of men and women who had built fortunes on risk. At its head sat Maya Johnson, her posture impeccable, her expression calm, the embodiment of control. Executives stole glances at her, some with respect, some with confusion. For months they had known a mysterious financial strategist who was said to hold the keystone of the deal, yet none of them had expected her to be the woman who had quietly endured insult at the gala. Maya offered no explanation, no apology for her presence. She simply began arranging her notes with the precision of someone preparing to conduct a symphony. The room shifted around her, conversation softening, as though instinctively aligning to her gravity. The doors opened with the sweep of entitlement, and Victoria Langford strode in as though the building itself belonged to her. She wore power like a tailored suit, her chin lifted, her steps unhurried. She did not glance at Maya immediately. Instead, she acknowledged the others with brief nods, allowing the pause to grow deliberate. When her gaze finally landed on Maya at the head of the table, her lips curved faintly upward, though the expression carried no warmth. She slid into her chair as if the arrangement were a mistake soon to be corrected. "Shall we begin?" Maya's voice cut cleanly through the room, calm but commanding, free of ornament. She opened her presentation. Charts glowing on the wall as numbers and projections filled the space with undeniable clarity. Her delivery was sharp yet measured, each phrase purposeful, weaving data into narrative, risk into opportunity. Executives leaned forward, scribbling notes, nodding as the vision crystallized before them. For the first time, many realized that this deal was not a gamble but a calculated triumph, if guided by the right hands. Victoria interjected with practiced smoothness, her words wrapped in honey but edged with steel. "Impressive models," she said, tilting her head, though perhaps too ambitious. "Markets don't bend so easily, Miss Johnson. Experience teaches us that." Maya did not flinch. She met Victoria's gaze and replied evenly, "Markets bend to strategy, not arrogance. What I've outlined here is not ambition. It's inevitability, provided discipline is maintained." Her tone did not rise, yet left no space for dismissal. A flicker of something, irritation or surprise, crossed Victoria's eyes before vanishing behind her usual veneer. The hours unfolded with tension sharpening like a blade. Victoria attempted to reclaim the room with anecdotes of past victories, with subtle reminders of her status, with dismissive asides designed to reduce Maya's authority. Each time, Maya countered not with emotion but with precision, data that undercut her assumptions, legal precedents that weakened her claims, financial models that illuminated her blind spots. Slowly, the weight of credibility shifted, executives turning toward Maya not just for explanation, but for guidance. The pivotal moment arrived when Victoria attempted to corner her opponent with a question meant to expose inexperience. "Tell me, Maya," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "what happens when unforeseen volatility strikes? When markets collapse and investors scatter? Surely you've not accounted for chaos itself." Maya tapped the tablet before her, and the screen bloomed with contingency frameworks, layers of foresight so detailed they drew murmurs from the room. Volatility is not a surprise. It is a certainty. The question is not if it arrives, but when. These are the mechanisms prepared to absorb impact while maintaining liquidity. The collapse. Victoria's limousine purred through the city streets like a predator gliding through its territory, tinted windows hiding her sharp profile as she stared at the lights blurring past. The gala had ended, but the echo of whispers lingered in her mind. She had dismissed them as petty gossip, the sort of murmurs that clung to power like moths to flame. In her world, perception mattered, but reputation could be repaired with wealth, with spectacle, with the sheer force of dominance. She leaned back into the leather seat and smirked, reassuring herself that she had done what needed to be done. She had drawn a line in the sand, a reminder that not everyone could stand at her level. Yet, beneath that assurance, a strange unease stirred, one she refused to name. While Victoria retreated into her fortress of certainty, Maya returned to her suite with a different kind of silence, one charged not with denial but with intent. She stood before the window of her hotel room, gazing at the sprawl of skyscrapers, each one a monument to ambition and conquest. Her phone buzzed with messages, supportive notes from allies who had witnessed the incident, some angry on her behalf, others quietly amused, recognizing the irony. Maya read them all without responding, her thoughts already shaping the events yet to come. She had not expected Victoria to shake her hand. The refusal was not surprise. It was simply the loudest example yet of what she had endured her entire life. But this time, there was more at stake than pride. Victoria had been born into marble halls and inherited thrones. Her earliest memories were of estates with hedges cut into shapes of lions and horses, of long dining tables where her father presided over discussions of markets and monopolies as though they were family gossip. Tutors praised her ruthlessness, mistaking arrogance for brilliance. Her empire was not built from scratch, but passed down like a crown, though she wore it as though she had forged it herself. To her, people like Maya represented disruption. Outsiders claw at walls they were never meant to climb. Victoria did not fear competition, so long as it came from her circle. But Maya was a breach in the system, and breaches, in Victoria's world, were patched quickly and without mercy. Maya's path could not have been more different. Raised in a small neighborhood where opportunity felt like a rumor, she had carved her future with unrelenting persistence. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep the lights on, had instilled in her the idea that excellence was not optional. It was survival. Maya had excelled at school not only because of her intelligence, but because she had no safety net to fall back on. Scholarships carried her across oceans, each step forward earned through sleepless nights and silent sacrifices. Professors remember her not for her brilliance alone, but for her refusal to accept mediocrity, even in environments designed to remind her she was an outsider. Her career had been a series of battles fought in boardrooms where she was often the only black woman, sometimes the only woman at all. She had learned early how to master silence as a weapon, to let others underestimate her until the moment she unveiled a strategy so precise that the room tilted in her favor. She had built alliances across industries, navigated betrayals, and sharpened her instincts until she became known not just as competent but indispensable. That reputation had carried her to this moment, to the threshold of a deal worth $5 billion, one that could reshape entire markets. Victoria knew the deal, of course. She had studied its outlines, identified the players, and positioned herself to profit. Yet she had never bothered to learn who the key architect was. To her, power existed only in circles of familiar names, in family legacies and board seats handed down like heirlooms. Maya's name was unfamiliar, and in Victoria's world, unfamiliarity equaled irrelevance. The irony was that Maya was not a peripheral figure, but the very axis upon which the deal turned. Her decision alone could dictate whether the merger would flourish or collapse, though she had chosen to keep her role quiet until the timing served her. The night of the gala replayed itself in Maya's thoughts, not as a wound but as confirmation. Victoria had shown the world her hand, arrogance unmasked as prejudice, and Maya, instead of responding in kind, had shown restraint. That restraint was not passivity but strategy. Anger would have been wasted energy. Dignity, however, had power that extended beyond the ballroom. She knew the other guests would remember the refusal, and memory had a way of resurfacing when loyalties shifted. Meanwhile, Victoria confided her inner circle over brandy in her penthouse, retelling the incident as though it were proof of her superiority. She imitated Maya's poised smile with mocking exaggeration, earning laughter from sycophants who lived off her wealth. To them, Maya was a forgettable footnote, someone who would fade into obscurity by morning. Victoria relished the retelling, blind to the possibility that she had not humiliated Maya, but exposed herself. The true conflict between them was not just personal, but systemic, rooted in two visions of power. Victoria's was inherited, exclusive, and rigid, a fortress meant to keep outsiders at bay. Maya's was earned, expansive, and adaptive, built not on entitlement but on resilience. Their meeting at the gala was inevitable, two trajectories colliding in a space too small to contain them both. One sought to diminish, the other sought only to endure, yet endurance, over time, was more dangerous than arrogance. In the days that followed, murmurs about the gala spread through channels Victoria could not control. Executives who had witnessed the moment replayed it in hushed conversations, some disapproving, others gleeful at the spectacle. Maya's name began to surface more frequently, attached not to the insult, but to the intrigue surrounding her composure. "Who is she?" became the question whispered in corridors, the kind of question that grows into momentum. Victoria ignored it at first, convinced that curiosity fades faster than headlines. But curiosity did not fade, it deepened. The closer the deal approached, the more Maya's influence became undeniable. Partners began to realize that their negotiations, their projections, their very hopes for profit were tied not to Victoria's empire, but to the woman she had dismissed. That realization had yet to reach Victoria in its full weight, but cracks had begun forming, subtle enough to escape her notice, undeniable to those who watched closely. Maya, for her part, prepared meticulously. Every document, every forecast, every contingency was aligned. She did not allow herself to dwell on the insult beyond what it revealed. Victoria's blindness. Blindness, she knew, was a liability. And in the world of finance, liabilities had a way of dragging empires into ruin. She focused on the coming meeting. The boardroom where silence would no longer suffice, and where a role would have to be declared without ambiguity. The night before the negotiations, she sat once more by the window of her hotel suite. City lights stretching out like constellations. She thought of her mother, of the sacrifices that had built this moment. She thought of every door slammed in her face, every time she had been told to wait, to prove herself again, to lower her voice, to step aside. Those memories did not weaken her. They steadied her.